Good morning. Many of us in this room will require organ transplants at some point during our lives. And unfortunately, some of us will not get them. We'll die before we've reached the top of the waiting list, before an immune-compatible organ has been found for us. And as a society, as scientists, as clinicians, we need to figure out ways to resolve this problem. I'm here to tell you today that tissue engineering is one approach by which we can think about solving that problem. And my real message is we need to think big in tissue engineering. We need to be brave and think about the grand challenges and how we're going to tackle them. What I mean by tissue engineering is the combination of cells, your own cells or donated cells or stem cells, combined with what we call a scaffold, which is a template, a material in the shape of the organ or the tissue you want to create. And we can use this combination of cells and scaffolds to form relatively simple, thin, low cell number organs already very effectively. For example, cartilage, skin, these kind of tissues, we know how to make them, and in some cases they're being implanted into patients all around the world. But the challenge of large, complex organs like the heart, the liver, the kidneys, is about size and it's about complexity. So in organ engineering, size matters. And one of the key problems with size is delivering enough oxygen into the middle of the growing organs as it's developing in the laboratory so that the cells don't die. And you can see that illustrated here. This is a simple tissue. This is cartilage grown in my laboratory. It's just 5 millimeters in diameter and just 2 millimeters thick. And the red stain there shows you a nice, even distribution of the cartilage that we've created over a month across the membrane, the scaffold where we put the cells. And here you can see exactly the same experiment, exactly the same method, except now the membrane we started with was 6 millimeters thick, going into the plane of the picture there. And now you can see we've formed a ring of cartilage around the outside, but there's a kind of hole in the middle. And that hole is because the cells are dying, and the main reason the cells are dying is because they're not getting enough oxygen. So we need to think about ways of getting oxygen into the middle. And that's a simple tissue, relatively thin. It's obviously much bigger and much harder for large, complex organs. And when I say complex, I mean that at many levels, but in particular, the complexity of larger organs is that they tend to have different cell types, often many different cell types. And we need to find those kind of cells to get them into these growing organs. And we need to position those cells. We need to get them in the right place at the right time to form the function that's required of them to create the organ in the laboratory before we implant it. So we need to figure out technologies which allow us to build that complexity. And some of the solutions will be relatively simple and some a little bit harder. Let me illustrate that with the story about when a team across Europe, of which I was part, attempted to grow a 6 centimeter segment of airway, of tracheal tissue. And we were doing this because of a patient in Spain who was extremely ill because of a collapsed left bronchus, that's the left branch of the airway. And we came together as a team because we figured out that we had a range of different technologies that we could bring together to solve the problem of how to create something that would function as if it was an airway, even if it didn't look exactly like that airway. And the key here was that we wanted to position two different cell types. On the last slide, I showed you cartilage, which is just one cell type. Now we've increased in complexity by 1 order of magnitude to 2 cell types. Cartilage cells on the outside, because airway has cartilage for some degree of rigidity. And then another kind of cell, which we call epithelial cells, which form the lining, the inner lining of this tube, which is critical to its long-term survival and function. And we needed to position those epithelial cells on the inside. And you can see in this bioreactor, this little box with its rotating arm, we're able to allow the cells that we positioned on the outside for cartilage and on the inside for epithelium, allow them to grow in the right place at the right time before implantation. And that was then implanted in June 2008 into the patient, Claudia Castillo. And here is the implanted engineered trachea on the day of implantation, looking down into the tissue, and it's white. There's no mucosa, but there's epithelial cells that we've positioned onto that inner lining. And a month later, when we took a biopsy, you can now see that there's a lot of redness there, and the biopsy showed clear evidence of mucosal formation, and that's because we've got the right cells in the right place at the right time. And now, almost 5 years later, Claudia is alive and well, suffering no consequences from that surgery. Now, positioning of the cells wasn't the only reason we were able successfully to engineer this trachea, but it was a critical part. But again, this is still a relatively simple tissue, just 2 cell types and still a relatively thin membrane of tissue. If we're going to start thinking about using this kind of approach for more complex organs, to solve the problem of waiting lists, to solve the problem of the failure to provide what our patients need, then we need to come up with new technologies. And in Bristol, we're working on this technology, which we call cell painting. And this is about a very simple way of effectively positioning proteins on the surface of cells. And those proteins allow us to control the behavior of those cells in a very exquisite way. So, for example, we can deliver a protein that carries oxygen onto the surface of those cells that we put right into the middle of this growing organ, and that will allow us to improve the growth potential. We can put growth factors on there and homing proteins to deliver the cells to the right part of the growing organ at the right time. With this kind of technology and others being developed around the world, we can bring together an approach which will allow us one day to create large complex organs and I hope therefore impact on waiting lists and impact on patients' lives. Thank you.